And we are recording. All right, Mr. Boobles, go ahead and kick us off, man.
All right, so we got Daniel Vacanti back on the podcast, and Daniel really doesn't need another introduction, but Daniel's one of the creators of Kanban. I was back at Microsoft in 2007, has been working with Kanban for a long time, now also works with Scrum.org, and is starting his own professional training organization, Pro Kanban. So we're going to be diving into all that a little bit here, Daniel. But we got you on, and so Jeff and I were just like, let's get some free consulting. We got some questions for you, and you're an expert, and we think we know what we're talking and how we'd answer these questions, but we'd like to get your opinion. So I got a question. So I'm working with a client right now, and their sales is always asking, when can you start? Like, when can you start this brand new project? This new statement of work gets signed, and we want you to do this thing. And we have a Kanban board, and we have policies, and we have WIP limits, and we're tracking our cycle time, our work item age, all those things, right? But like, what's the next step? How would you answer that question if someone asked you that?
Yeah, man, you get. I forgot about this last time. You just come right out of the gate, don't you? Yeah. Speaking of and by the way, thanks for having me here again. Maybe I should hold off on the thanks. It's good to be here. And for the free consulting, the one part you forgot about in my introduction, it does say sucker right across here. So yes, happy to give you guys as much free consulting as you need. So let's talk about that question. When can we start? So, I think in the last episode, and you guys will have to remind me. I think we talked about a book that I wrote called "When Will It Be Done?" Because that's the most important question that our customers ask. But I hope I alluded to, and maybe I didn't. But the next book I'd like to write, if I ever write another book, is what I think is the much more important question, which is, when should we begin? Right? Everybody's focused on, hey, when will it be done? But the much more important question, I think, is, when should we begin? And focusing on done is, it's kind of Agile's fault, and dare I say Scrum's fault even, because we've got this definition of done, and it's so important. But I really do think a more important policy or whatever you want to call it is what's your definition of ready? What does it even mean to be ready? So when I think about answering the question, when should we begin? It's a function of at least two things. And this is just off the top of my head because, of course, you didn't let me prep for any of these questions. It's really a function of two things. So we were talking on the intro a little bit about before this started, controlling work in progress. Right? This idea of controlling work in progress, and the way that you're going to drive efficiency, effectiveness, predictability, all those things. Well, one of the best ways to do that is by controlling work in progress. Once you control work in progress, then you're going to create, if you do a decent job of it, you're going to create what's called a pull system. And the reason the pull system is so important is because when you're controlling work in progress, you're hopefully controlling WIP, if I can say WIP. You're hopefully controlling WIP at the level of capacity of your team, of your organization, of your portfolio, whatever you want to call it. And we can maybe dive a little bit deeper into this if you guys want to. I'm not sure how deep to go, but if we're controlling work in progress to the level of our capacity, then we're creating what's called a pull system. And when will it begin, when should it begin, is really answered by, okay, when do we have capacity as signaled by our work in progress limit? So I'm just making this up, right? If our work in progress limit for our team board is 6 and there are only 5 things on the board, that's a pretty good indication. It's not always an indication, but it's generally a pretty good indication that we can start something new. If our work in progress limit is 6 and there are 20 things on the board, that's a really, really good indication that we probably shouldn't be starting something. And you guys, by the way, interrupt me because I will just babble. I'll take up the whole.
So here's what I'll lead. Most organizations that we run into, they come in and they have a work in progress problem, and they have way too much going on. And so one of our first steps is, okay, let's start and put some work in progress limits. Let's try to manage that flow. And we always usually want that number to be lower. Like, it's usually not like, oh, you need to get more work in progress. That's your solution. I've never actually seen that happen. And so But then as you break that down, you're saying, well, we're going to finish something, but we're not going to start something else because, maybe we had 30 things in progress and we want to get it down to 10. So now that's a really long time, right, to get that down before we can start something.
Yep.
And so an approach that I normally take is, well, let's take it incrementally. We're at 30. Let's get it to 25. And then let's take some new work on. And let's get up to like maybe 26 or 27. And then let's go down to 22 next time. And then let's take some more work. Mm-hmm. What is your approach to something like that?
I'm probably a little bit more hardcore than that, just because mostly because I'm impatient and I'm rude. The Italian in me just wants to punch people in the face. When I see things like that. I forget where I saw the heuristic. I want to credit Don Reinertsen with this. I don't know if everybody out there, if you don't know who Don Reinertsen is, if you're a student of Flow and you don't know who Don Reinertsen is, you really need to go figure out who Don Reinertsen is. He is the Don of Flow. And a lot of my thinking has been influenced by Don's work. And so I want to attribute this heuristic to him, but I'm not sure. Do not quote me on this. Please do not quote me on this. But I could have sworn he or somebody said, a good place to start is just to take your work in progress and cut it in half. Mm-hmm. Right? That's as good as any to start. Me personally, especially when I'm working with teams, I love to start with a blank whiteboard and just as a team figure out, okay, let's map out our process. Let's decide how we want to work. And now let's decide, okay, what is our policy in terms of how many things we want in progress? And if that number is 6 and there are 30 things on the board, well, then we need to figure out, okay, what are those 6 most important things? And let's just focus on those things. I'm kind of a fan of that, but it's fairly drastic, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know how well it works, but I like to get in there and make the change as quickly as possible. I'll leave it at that.
So out of curiosity, Jeff, thinking about the original question that you were throwing out there, when can we start this? The question is for both of you though, really, wouldn't it be as simple as looking at your departure rate and saying, okay, if 3 things leave our workflow every 5 days or whatever it is, that's the soonest we can get started with it. Like, is it, or am I missing something inside of here?
If I can jump in, you're close. You're about 80% there. The thing that you have to make sure though, is that if 3 things leave and 3 things come in, then that means whatever WIP is in your system is stable. And that means that that's what you want it to be. So if you have 30 things in progress, but you only want 6, 3 things leave and 3 things come in, you're still going to have 30 things in progress.
Okay. So the assumption would be as long as you're adhering to the WIP limit, then your departure rate is when you can pull the next thing in.
You got it. And sorry, Jeff,
I was going to jump in and say like
B and M. Is that how?
Sure, you can.
Whatever.
I love it.
We'll answer to whatever you call us.
Right, yeah.
For better or worse.
So to my experience, so like especially when we're doing this, like it's never stable. Like the world is changing too fast. The teams, the people leave, people get hired, like stuff happens. And so it's like, well, let's adjust the WIP limits here. Let's put them down here. And so it's like, there's always this fluctuation. And so you always have to be taking that with a grain of salt. So just saying off of departure rates, I mean, that could be a guide, but I think you also have to like look at like what actually happened. And then like, you're always making changes to the system. And
I'm going to totally geek out on some metric stuff, Little Saw specifically for you guys here. If you go and read the proof of Little's Law, because I know you have nothing better to do than to go look up the proof of Little's Law from 1961, and Little actually published several updates to his proof over the years. Little's Law is, by the way, it's coming up on its 60th anniversary. No, 60th anniversary. 60th anniversary, right? Its 50th anniversary is too. Anyway. There's some key things that you really need to look for in your process for Little's Law to be valid. And one of these things is arrival rate to match departure rate, but it's not instantaneous arrival rate and not instantaneous departure rate. It's actually long-term averages. And so, Jeff B., I think that's what you were talking about, is Yeah, just because three things leave doesn't necessarily mean three things can come in. But over the long term, if on average our departure rate is roughly equal to our arrival rate, that's one good indication. That's one pretty good indication that we've got good flow. It doesn't guarantee it. It's not sufficient, but it's one good key indicator for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we should do a show on deep dive of Little's Law, by the way, sometime if you guys want to. Just throwing it out there.
Well, we could jump into it a little bit now. I mean, maybe just let's define it for if there's anyone out there who hasn't heard of it, right? So, basically, what Little's Law is, there's a correlation between three variables: work in progress, cycle time, and throughput. So, as your cycle time, as your work in progress goes up, your cycle time is going to get longer. It's going to take longer to get stuff done the more you're working at it, right? You're dispersing your energy through more things. And the amount of stuff you get done over a period of time is going to go down.
Yeah.
So the alternative is, if you want more stuff done, is either work harder or decrease your work in progress. And so you can decrease your work in progress, your cycle times will get shorter, and your throughput will go up. And then there's a caveat, right? I'll let Daniel actually, because there's some math there. Like when you get down to the very low numbers, where there's some nuance to that, and I think you probably know it tighter than me, so I'll let you explain that, Daniel.
Well, no, I thought you were doing a great job.
Okay.
So I was loving to see where you were going with it. I mean, I don't know if you want to finish your thought or if you want me to jump in now. Or
no, but I think that there's a certain point where, and the math isn't coming to me, but it's when you get down to single piece flow, it's your cycle time might be really short, but your throughput isn't to the maximum that it can be, right? There's a breaking point there.
Yeah, there's a lower limit as well as an upper limit, and that's so the key thing. The key thing. There's 16 key things with Little's Law, but one of the biggest things is the understanding, as you were saying, the understanding of the relationship of the three variables: cycle time, work in progress, and throughput. But the point I want to be very, very pedantic about is it's a relationship of averages. So it's average cycle time equals, if you were to read the equation, it's average cycle time equals average work in progress divided by average throughput. And it's a relationship of those, as I was mentioning before, those long-term averages. So most people, if you were to go and just calculate off your board your cycle time and your work in progress and your throughput, and you would throw them into the equation, you will find, I'd be willing to bet one of you, Jeff's life on this, you will find that equation will not work out. And people look at that and they freak out like, Little's Law doesn't work, right? Look, here's all my data and it doesn't work out. And there's so many reasons why that doesn't work out. One of the biggest reasons is it's a relationship of long-term averages, and actually looking at relationships of averages is fundamentally flawed on a lot of levels. And I wish we could get into the flaw of averages too. Are these the tangents that you want?
Yeah, this is
just kind of
no. I got a question. When you say long term, what is long term? A week,
exactly.
A month, a year?
Exactly. I mean, it's totally context dependent. It's arbitrarily. I think he literally says in the proof, it's got to be an arbitrarily long period of time. So in your context, a month might be long enough, or 2 months, or 6 months, or 2 weeks. We just really don't know. But assuming that we have several things in place for Little's Law to hold, then Little's Law becomes this guide. It's essentially the instruction book of how you should be running your process, because there are all these assumptions that have to be in place for Little's Law to work. And you know that anytime you violate one of these assumptions, bad things are going to happen to you from a flow perspective. One of those assumptions is one we just talked about, that a long-term arrival rate has to roughly equal long-term departure rate, right? That's average, on average. That's one assumption. Another assumption is that the average age of your items in progress should neither be increasing or decreasing. And so that's kind of a key one, because most people think that if I have arrival rate and departure rate matched, I'm good. That's everything. I'm really good to go. No, that's just the starting point, because now we need to make sure the stuff that's in progress is flowing on average at roughly the same age as things have in the past. So that's another thing. So there's all kinds of well, I shouldn't say all kinds. There's 5 assumptions. There's 5 fundamental assumptions that need to be met And we know, like I said, at any given time, if we violate those assumptions, there's probably some bad things that are going to happen to us. And the problem is most teams that I work with, they violate them all the time, and they don't even know that they're doing it, right? They just don't have a clue, but they are. And then they wonder why is my process so unpredictable?
So go ahead, Jeff.
No, go for it.
All right. Well, I heard two, which was the arrival rate has to roughly match the departure rate. All the items should be aging at roughly the same lifespan, if you will.
Right. Yep.
What are the other three?
The other three, yes. Okay, so the other three, and you're quizzing me now. Right? That's fine. That's fine. The first one is one that it seems silly, but so many people overlook this, and it's again of crucial importance. It's that all the units have to match. So if you're measuring cycle time in days, then you have to measure throughput in days, and you have to measure WIP in days, right? I can't tell how many teams will want to measure, cycle time in days, but throughput in weeks, or God forbid, throughput in story points, right? And then they want to plug stuff into Little's Law, and they wonder why that, the Mars orbiter has slammed into the side of the planet because, we forgot to convert units. So yeah, all the units have to be consistent. That's fundamental. So that's generally speaking number one. So there's units have to be consistent, arrival rate roughly equal departure rate, age is neither increasing nor decreasing. The fourth, sorry, go ahead.
WIP not increasing or decreasing,
yep,
right?
That's the fourth one. And the fourth one, I debate this a lot. I've got, I guess I don't have anything better to do. So I get together with friends and we drink and we debate Little's Law. It's assuming all the other four hold, this one about WIP is neither increasing or decreasing. I don't know how you can have that not happen, right? I mean, but that is the fourth one, is that over the time frame of the calculation that your WIP is roughly neither increasing or decreasing.
But it's really large variances, isn't it, of WIP? Like you wouldn't want it to go
average.
from
it's average.
Yeah.
Yep. It's average. Yep. And then the last one, which is probably the one I think that gets violated the most, that no one really ever pays attention to. Age might be, but the last one is everything that enters your process needs to exit your process normally, right? It can't get lost, right? You just can't randomly, if something's in the middle, we're like, oh, okay, we're not going to work on that anymore. It still has to exit the process. It just cannot get lost. And so, anytime a team will just like, hey, we're working on something and we don't want to work on that anymore, and they just delete it. And I'm like, it freaks me out. I was like, no, because there's so many better ways to handle that exiting the process, so that we can understand what's really going on. So,
or staying in the process, right? Like if they just say, let's just keep iterating, but not releasing and keep working at it. Well, eventually you got to leave or it's not going to work out, right?
And then you'd see that reflected in age, right? Because if it's sitting there forever, then that's going to bring up the overall average age of your process. So those are the 5. And there will be a quiz later.
Awesome. Good thing I've been taking notes here. So one of the other questions that I had when we were, before we hit the record button here, you were, I want to say recently, maybe a few months ago, on an episode of Agile.fm, and it was a great listen, super cool stuff on there. But one of the things you were talking about was confidence intervals and what those actually do for you. And I can't remember if this was the way you phrased it or I stole it and I started articulating a little bit differently. But nonetheless, when I'm explaining it to people, I just say, think about this. It's Friday evening, and you're thinking, ooh, tomorrow would be a great day to go on a picnic with the family. So you decide to pull open the weather app, and the weather app says 10% chance of rain tomorrow. You think to yourself, 10% chance, that's not a big deal. Maybe I'll bring an umbrella, but other than that, we're willing to take that risk. No big deal. Maybe you pull open the weather app and it's 50% chance of rain. Ooh, that's pretty risky there. Maybe we should have a backup plan. Maybe we go see a movie instead of going on a picnic with the family. We'll kind of play by ear tomorrow, but 50%, we better have something else going on. And then maybe the last scenario is you open it up and it's 90% chance of rain tomorrow. Well, screw that. We're not going to go on the hike, or the picnic or whatever. Let's stay in and watch a movie or something like that. And what you were articulating there was really the action that the confidence interval is causing. And that's really what the confidence interval is more about. It's the action that you are going to take, the forcing function. And I found that really intriguing. So I thought if given opportunity was anything to expand on there with it.
I mean, you guys do a much better job of explaining this stuff than I do. I think I'm not sure that I have much. Other than maybe we should take a little a step back or two and make sure people even understand. Why are we even talking about confidence intervals, right? I mean, why is even that important? And it really comes down to this idea of, when we're making a forecast, and I personally love the example of a weather forecast because it's something, as you said, it's something that we encounter every single day of our lives. But when we're talking about forecast, when we're talking about forecasting the future is inherently uncertain, right? It's not deterministic. We just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, or much less 2 weeks from now, or even worse, 2 years from now. We just don't know. There's uncertainty inherent in any forecast that we give. And the second we talk about uncertainty, then we know, hey, there's a science of uncertainty, and that science is called probability or statistics or whatever. And that means that whenever we're dealing with something that's uncertain, we have to take a probabilistic approach. You have to. Determinism does not work. It just does not. Throw it out the window. It does not work. There's no such thing as 100%. It's intrinsic. It's intrinsic to what we're trying to do. You just don't get to escape it. And so, but it's freeing once you kind of understand that. What's really freeing is you embrace it, because now, Jeff M., now we can start taking the actions that you're talking about. It's really all about that assessment of risk, and how much risk are we willing to live with, and what actions are we willing to take based on that risk. Like you said, if you're planning for a picnic tomorrow, I mean, who wouldn't? Especially if it's outdoor. I'm assuming you're doing a picnic outdoor. Does a picnic by definition have to be outdoor? I don't know. That's a good question. But assuming it's outdoor, who wouldn't check the weather and take some action based on the risk that weather app is telling you? It's the exact same thing in our world. Exactly the same thing. So if you're trying to do planning, trying to do forecasting, trying to do whatever, and you have no understanding of risk, and no way to, more importantly, maybe no way to quantify that risk, then I don't know what you're doing, right? Because you're missing out on a lot of stuff.
And so when we talk about confidence intervals, one of the tools that I know I use a lot, I think you use a lot, Daniel, Jeff uses, we talk about this in our talks a lot there, Jeff and I have in the past, is using like a Monte Carlo simulation to simulate the future, then using confidence intervals. And we've, made statements like, you should never give a date for anything to be done without a confidence interval. There's no reason to ever do that. Like, this is so easy to do in 2020. There's nice tools out there that are pretty much free that will let you do this for free. You just got to use them. But the thing that is a game changer, because, back in the day when we had waterfall projects and stuff, people would do forecasts all the time. And they would go around and they would ask, Jeff, hey, Jeff, how long is it going to take you to do the database for that thing? And then they'd go around to you, Daniel, and they'd say, hey, how long is it going to take you to code that? And then they go to me and say, how long is it going to take to test that? And we'd all give them numbers. And they'd be like, Jeff always is sandbagging. Daniel never gives himself enough time, and they would adjust them, right, depending on what they thought. And then they would, when they put him into some kind of forecasting tool, and so it would be what I think, so a guess, and we'd forecast guesses with simulations. What's different, I think, about what we're doing today is we're using data from the past, empirical data, and we're saying, well, based on the past, if the like-size work items come through again, this is what we've done before. Here's what will probably happen again with our, the best knowledge we have available. And here's some confidence intervals that you have. So you can make a business decision on this. If it's not that important, maybe 50-50 is okay. If it is pretty important, maybe you want to be at 85, maybe 90. I don't know what your number is, but there's something you want to be there at,
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. And if I can just tweak one little thing that you said, because we've taken the train ride around the zoo and we've come back to where we are. This is, again, where Little's law is so fundamentally important, because if I heard you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I heard you correctly, you said as long as things, are similarly sized, the stuff that we're working on in the future is similarly sized to stuff that's in the past. We don't even need to have that.
Don't even. As long as we are following those assumptions of Little's law, right? As long as we've got those assumptions in place, we can accept a pretty wide variance of items that are coming through our system. As long as those assumptions hold, we're probably good. And we were forecasting based off of phases, back with the waterfall days. Now we're forecasting on this is what it takes to go from the start of something to its releasable, right? Which is a totally different thing because everything's visible, right? Which it was in the past. You'd go back with how many bug fixes and it's done, but it's not tested, and you'd have all the stuff you couldn't see. And so how do you forecast something you don't know about? And you don't have that hopefully anymore. At least you can control that, right? In your forecast even now.
Right. But this is it's very, very uncomfortable. Moving to this world is very, very uncomfortable for more traditional type project managers. It's potentially very, very uncomfortable for our customers, because our customers are going to be like, I just want a date. Just give me a date, because that's what they want. And helping them to understand that, like you said, we need to come up with actions based on risk rather than just on a single date. It's a much more mature is the word that came to mind, but that's not right. But it is a much more maybe adult type conversation.
Well, it's based off of fact instead of feeling, right? Like I've been in those steering committee meetings where it's like someone's head's about to come off because they made a guess of when something was going to happen, and that didn't happen. And now it's like, hey, it's just math. Like it's 80%. Like if we aren't going to hit it, it's the 20. It's the 1 out of 5 chance, right? Like we hit the 1 out of 5. Darn, we take those odds every time in poker if we're playing it. But
not to get too. And I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you guys, but not to get too political. And I apologize for using this example, but it's a decent example. Is the 2016 election. Nate Silver, if you don't know who Nate Silver is, again, you should really go and research Nate Silver. He's into predicting elections. Gave Trump, going into that election, gave Trump a 25% chance of winning. That 25% is not zero, right? 25%, that means 1 in every 4 elections, Trump wins. And so when Trump won, everybody was like, "Oh, well, Nate Silver sucks. Nate Silver, he's not accurate, right? He's not predictable, right?" When no, he actually quantified the chances of trying. It turns out we either got lucky or unlucky, depending on your own political views. But he had a 1 in 4 chance of winning that. And so now the problem is that leads to a more philosophical debate in terms of, well, did we really just get unlucky, or is the model wrong? That's a much deeper question, and that's where we need to bring in books like Annie Duke's Thinking in Bets and those types of books to evaluate our modeling process, our decision-making process, to say, hey, is this model really reflecting reality? But then that brings in what we were talking about before is, if we think Trump has a 25% chance of winning the election, what's the proper mitigation or not mitigation strategy? Again, I don't want to get political. Should that happen? So
Troy McGinnis said this one time. I think it was Agile 2018. He was talking about how if you could go back in time and, like, let's just say you're starting today and you say, okay, if we were at 3 months ago and we wanted to know 3 months before that, even so 6 months from today, that was our data. So we had that 6 to 3 month data. We plugged that into our system. Could we predict where we are today or what's going to happen? Like that was our data. Let's see data from the past. See if we can predict where we are today. Would that work? Like, what would that look like? And I think that's not a bad thing to say, like, oh yeah, we're pretty close. Like maybe it's.
Yeah, I'm not. I'll be honest with you. I'm not a fan of that backcasting or whatever they call that. I'm really not because of this concept of continuous forecasting. I talk a lot about. Did I talk about continuous forecasting last time?
So.
Yeah. So yeah, there are so many things, so many assumptions I think that have to be put in place for backcasting to work. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is a tool and it is a something to do, but I don't know that if we went back and tried to predict the future that we got with data that we had in the past, I don't know that that's necessarily a decent validation or invalidation of our model. To be honest with you, but now we're really, I think, getting into the weeds of why that may work or.
But if nothing else, it's a ballpark, right?
Yeah.
Like if it's really off, then maybe we do have a problem, and maybe we have a lot of instability, and we can't do it for whatever reason.
That's what I was going to say. Or maybe our system fundamentally changed in a way that that we didn't realize, and so that's going to require other statistical techniques like statistical process control and things like that to understand: do we really have this stability in our process that we think that we do, or has our system fundamentally changed and become unpredictable?
Right.
Oh, we're way down. We got down in the weeds very, very quickly there. I don't know how many people are still listening right now.
No, it's I'm always continually intrigued by all of this stuff, and it's cards on the table. Like we use the Actionable Agile tool for Azure DevOps. So this is stuff that we're fairly consistently nerding out over at work, and things that we're looking at. So. I guess if we don't get to it, there's another plug for the tool that you've got out there. It's awesome. It plugs right into Azure DevOps, and it makes it just really easy to be looking at this stuff. And it's an excellent opportunity in the sprint retrospective to pull this stuff open and be taking a look at it. Right. So if nothing else, let's at least give you a plug there for that one.
well, thank you for that. But I mean, sincerely, thank you very much. But I want to be very clear: is the point of the tool, I think, is to hopefully prompt these types of conversations. To me, it's not about the data. It's more about the process that generated the data. And are we improving? Are we spotting these opportunities for improvement? And what are we doing with the information that we're getting? I'm not one of these guys that just focus on the data. I'm much more interested in the intersection of data and process, because that's to me where we really want to be.
Sorry, Jeff, I have one quick question. It just came to me. So we've been focusing a lot around metrics, the data for the system. But I'm curious, do you is that all you look at? Is there anything else from like a product perspective that you're like, here are some metrics that I also look at? Or is it really focused on, let's say, delivery type metrics?
So I'm trying to think of a not rude way to say this. I'll just say it. Whatever. Most teams the vast majority of teams that I go in are just so bad at the fundamentals, the fundamental blocking and tackling, that I spend all of my time just looking at the basics. It's like why would we even start talking about ridiculous stuff like cost of delay and all of these other things if we can't get the basics right, the fundamentals right? I mean, if teams are still looking at story points, we've got a much, much bigger problem than, hey, should we be using cost of delay to prioritize based on value, right? I mean, you're just so not ready for that conversation. You see what I'm saying? So I think that's there are other things that I've been thinking about and that I've kind of played around with, but I seem to spend most of my time just trying to get people away from, because I think Agile, I've said this so many times, for some reason, people have equated story points with Scrum, which is atrocious. And that has just set the industry back so far, a decade or more, I think. And so just working to get to unwind that is a full-time job.
Mm-hmm. But they have to know that there's an alternative, and it has to be easy enough that they can understand. And I think that's where a lot of clients that I've worked with run into problems, is it's not easy. They'll spend days trying to get data out of a tool and then try to do what you're doing in like Actionable Agile, and it's just not the same, and they don't quite get what they were looking for, and so they settle for something, and they're like, this doesn't quite give me what I want, so I'm going to go back to story points because at least it gave me something. I think that's a problem that a lot of people find.
Yeah. Sorry. I keep jumping in and I keep drowning out. I'm sorry, but why I get frustrated with that is, but look at it from your customer's perspective. What's not easy? Go explain a story point to a CFO. Go explain a story point to your end user.
Yeah,
they don't have a clue what a story point is, nor should they. But if we start talking about cycle time and throughput, like how long does it take me to get something done? How many things can I get done? That's stuff that they fundamentally understand. So I don't know. I just never really bought into the whole, well, story points are easier. I don't know who you're talking to, but the people I'm talking to, it is definitely not easier. It's actually much, much, much harder. And it doesn't really give us a result that we're looking for, which is even worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit last time, but I do think part of it is what's your goal? Is the goal, like you were talking about, is analysis, essentially. Hey, we're going to use story points to just quickly figure out if we're on the same page with how big this thing is that we're thinking about. If it's really just baseline analysis, awesome. That's a great use of story points. But when we start, if the goal is, well, let's forecast when this is going to be done, it's, well, all right, let's pump the brakes. We've got a better tool over here for us. And wouldn't it be so great because now we've got all this historical information that we can just use and bring right in and proof that there answers our question for us. So I think it does depend on like what's your goal? What's the point of using these things? Tool fit for purpose is what I want to throw out there.
Absolutely. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So I don't have a good segue here, but I know, like, we've been nerding out on a bunch of stuff, and one of the other things that we definitely wanted to talk about was the prokanban.org stuff that you're working on. So Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So how do I? You think I'd be ready for that one too? I've been lucky enough to be a part of the Kanban movement or community or whatever you want to call it since its very beginning. And somewhere along the lines, Kanban kind of lost its way, and we don't necessarily need to get into the why or how of that. Although I do think the why or how is important, but we don't need to necessarily get into that right now. And so what prokanban.org is, it's my reaction to kind of being introduced to the Scrum.org community, because I got introduced to Scrum.org, and it's like, this is, for the most part, this is what a healthy community is supposed to look like, right? This is what, don't get me wrong. Scrum.org is not perfect, and there's things that, but it's like, this is how something should function. And so prokanban.org is this kind of community-driven initiative to try and kind of steal back, if you will, Kanban for what it was intended, and implemented for how it was always intended. Because I think it's been perverted to be a profit machine for an individual, rather than a learning tool for a community. And so so that's why I was just so lucky to be a part of, be introduced to Scrum.org, because it opened my eyes and it kind of inspired me. It's like, this is how Kanban used to be, and we can get that back. So a bunch of us in the community got together and said, okay, let's do this. And so that's what we're doing. It's a safe, inclusive, hopefully diverse community where people can come, and if they want to learn about Kanban, they can, and they don't have to worry about, being threatened. I'm trying to be careful with the words that I use, but like I said, it's just a safe, inclusive, diverse community that we're going for.
So as part of that community, just because you were kind of using the PST community as a point of reference, is it just a community? Is it going to have training, certifications going through there? And not to put you on the spot, but is there kind of like a vision statement, or kind of, what's the 3-5 year, what's the thing that you're trying to accomplish through the organization?
So number one, like I said, if we can reestablish that sense of community within the Kanban movement, if you will, then I will have considered it a success. Certainly, as part of that, there will be things like training and assessments for, and the assessment. It's people want to focus so much on the certification. I couldn't care less about the certification. What I really care about is validated knowledge. It's like, have we really learned something, and are we able to apply it? That's what I really care about. And there, we can talk about the pros and cons, and whether assessments work for that or whether they don't. But it's a place to start. And so there will be so yes, there will be all of those things. But like I said, my vision is more like driving. I don't know if you guys have heard of Carl Scotland. Carl Scotland's a good friend of mine, and he's been with the Kanban community from the very beginning too. And his mantra for the longest time was keep Kanban weird. Keep Kanban weird. And that's why even if I don't necessarily, because there's so many things with Scrum that I don't agree with, but I would never say to somebody from the Scrum community, well, don't come to Kanban because you do Scrum and we do Kanban. No, it's like we can all learn from each other. Nobody has a monopoly on all the right answers here. So if we can learn from Scrum, if we can learn from, God forbid, SAFe, if we can learn from all of these other communities, theory of constraints community, whatever you want to talk about, then I think that's goodness, and that's what we should be focused on.
So assessments are really good at assessing your knowledge. Like, do you have the knowledge? Yes or no. We do those at Scrum.org, right? Mm-hmm. Pretty much all training organizations do those. But you said that you wanted to know if somebody could apply it. So how are you going to validate that people can apply this knowledge?
Good question. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I don't know. Do you think Scrum.org has a good answer for that? Because my pattern so far is like, what does Scrum.org do? And I just kind of steal from but in full transparency. I don't know. What do you guys think? What works for that? I really don't know.
Yeah, I think that there's ways to do it. I think that there's some proving out of like, hey, what have you done in the past? Maybe getting feedback from peers. I think there's more of that community you're talking about that could help to validate it. What I think is interesting is the more you learn that's out there, the more you realize there's so much more that you don't know. And it feeds your hunger to get better and make the world around you better, make your teams better, make your community better that you're a part of. If you're doing this nationally, then maybe your local community gets better because you learn about all these great things, that are possible. Yeah. And so I think that's what a community can do and can open some eyes. And I think that maybe there's some creative ways to do that.
I don't know if we talked about this last time. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but when I first read the Scrum Guide, and I read it cover to cover for the first time in, I think it was late 2017, I was amazed because when I read that document, I felt like Scrum talks about flow. They almost talk about flow better than the Kanban community did at the time. But nobody in the Scrum community really talked about flow, even though the Scrum Guide is a flow document. It probably doesn't read like a flow document to most people, but it read like a flow document to me. Everything that we've been talking about in terms of trying to understand risk, in terms of trying to control work in progress, in terms of, let's not make forecasts for too long, and let's make sure that we're inspecting and adapting on regular intervals. And those are all flow concepts, right? And so, yeah, I guess I'm just in violent agreement with you that, until you kind of experience all of those other things, you don't know, and you quickly realize that, yeah, wow, there is so a lot of other goodness in the world that we should just make ourselves open to and available to learn from.
Mm-hmm. So you dropped a particular little nugget inside of all that, and I have to dig a little bit deeper here. So what are some parts of Scrum that you don't agree with?
How much time do we have? Is it? I'm not as the Scrum Guide stands right now. I'm not a fan of the idea of multiple teams. In my world, there is one team, right? So this, I don't know, it's my interpretation that Scrum kind of sets up a tension between, and maybe purposely so, between, say, like the development team specifically and the wider Scrum team in general. And I personally don't like that model very much. In my world, there is one team, because of that, I wish so. I'm going to give a shout out to Ryan Ripley. Ryan Ripley and I, and Steve Porter, as a matter of fact, were sitting at dinner one night I can't even remember where. It was in Germany somewhere. And I was getting their kind of philosophy on what a Scrum Master is. And because the Scrum Master is kind of outside of the team, I feel that makes the Scrum Master I'm really struggling with words tonight because you guys, have me do this call at like 8:00 at night. So I'm really, really, really struggling with words. But maybe less skin in the game. I don't know. I don't know what
like maybe they have less accountability or something like that.
Whatever it is, and it makes their job that much more challenging. And so, and you guys know this, to get a really, really good Scrum Master, actually per the Scrum Guide, is infinitely hard. I mean, that's really, 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 really hard to do.
Yeah. I think where you're going with, they don't have any authority, so they have to influence without authority, right? Yeah. Like that, which it does take a skilled person who understands people and can read a room and can, help make things transparent. Now people want to improve, right, in certain ways, right?
Yep. And I don't know if Ken and Jeff would like the way that I would practice Scrum, but the parts of Scrum that I really, really like that I wish would be emphasis more is a lot of people seem to miss the fact, at least about my experience, that where the Scrum Guide says, coming out of sprint planning, we only need to have enough stuff to get the team going, right? In terms of that planning. In my world, sprint planning would take probably 2 minutes. All right, let's come up with a goal. What's the first couple of things that we need to get going? Let's go, right? I mean, and I don't know if that's how it's supposed to be intended, but that's certainly how I would do sprint planning. And to me, that's in full compliance with the Scrum Guide, myself. And I think we should be more open to that kind of more just in time planning, just in time forecasting, just in time whatever, and we can have philosophical debates about whether you should have carryover work between sprints and things like that,
And so, like, I think that's a myth that's out there. Like, you can't have carryover work. Like, right. So it doesn't say this in the Scrum Guide, but I might want to pull my PST card here. But like, there's teams where we're talking about like, what are we going to do? And they're doing we're talking about changing our cadence, and it's a 1 week cadence right now. But everything works really well except for the planning, because a lot changes with what the customer demands, and they are very close to their customers, like day to day close to customers. And so planning out 2 weeks with those customers just isn't realistic. Like, they need to plan every week with the customers. And so we're going to do, I think, all the events at 2 weeks, except we're going to do planning every week. We're going to do a main planning, and then we're going to plan what we can, and then we're going to replan the next week based off of what we know. And I have no problem with that. I think that's I think it's perfect for that situation. So
yeah, the blog post I want to write, if I ever get around to it, but to me, the two most important words in the Scrum Guide are at least. At least. It's either sprint goal or at least, but I'm going to go with at least. And this is something I learned from Steve Porter, as a matter of fact, is, most people think that in Scrum you have to you only do planning once, and it's at the beginning of the sprint, and you only do retrospectives once, and it's at the end of the sprint. And that's not true at all. It's just, you have to do these things at least once during the sprint. When you do them, there's certain things that have to happen at certain times, but there's nothing to say you can't do them multiple times. Like, there's nothing to say we can't plan multiple times. There's nothing to say we can't retrospect multiple times. There's nothing to say that we can't release multiple times, right? Right. That's very much in keeping with with Scrum, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to throw out there real quick, like point of reference. Granted, we have 1 week sprints, but our sprint planning literally just the other day was 10 minutes long. So we just walk into there. Hey, is everything? Is this about what we're going to be working on? Everybody understand? Cool. Let's go and beyond. Start getting work done. So I think the other thing to add on to your at least once, also just remember time boxes. That's simply the maximum amount of time something can go. There's nothing wrong with taking less time to get these things done.
That just brings me back to something else I remember. I think I had this. I keep throwing Steve Porter under the bus, but he doesn't mind. I'm going to keep. He's Canadian, so
he'll be fine with it.
But you guys are PST, so you can help me out with this. So the Scrum Guide says how long for sprint planning? What's the time box for sprint planning?
8 hours for a 1 month sprint.
Yep. And what's the time box for review and retrospective?
4 and 3 for a 1 month.
So it actually allows more for planning than it does for review, and that seems backward to me, right? We should be learning more than we should be planning. That's another thing that's kind of seems not quite right, imbalanced for me anyway. But.
Mm-hmm. And I would say like another typical thing, a lot of teams don't show metrics or they don't talk about that. I think that's something that we can learn from something that's pretty normal on Kanban teams to share those metrics with stakeholders and talk about what's happening. And so I do that with teams that I'm working with. Like, I think it's a good thing, good practice.
And, Scrum was designed as a framework, and I think that's wonderful. The problem is, and this is not Scrum's fault, but it created that kind of vacuum because we're supposed to be acting empirically and we're supposed to be inspecting, adapting, but the framework itself doesn't really give us many tools to be able to do that. And so, like I said, it kind of created that vacuum, and here came along story points and, all of this stuff that kind of filled that vacuum, which was very, very, very unfortunate. Because, like I said, that's where we get into trouble.
So a couple of things go back to where you said, I'm not sure about this thing, like the separation of the teams. I think it's more of like separation of responsibilities. Like everyone's accountable for delivering value to the customer. Mm-hmm. How they do that, everyone kind of has different controls. And I like to think about where we came from, right? Like we came from a very maybe command and control, top-down oriented culture in a lot of organizations. And managers told you exactly what tasks to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And this is saying, no, let the people that do the work figure that out. Let's separate that responsibility. And the people that are going to figure out what's important to be working on, you figure that out over here and just order that from an outcome based, so I think that's what they're trying to separate. And then for the Scrum Master, like I've seen teams where, continuous improvement isn't that important because the day-to-day stuff and the pressures they're feeling from the organization rules the day. And so then they'll never go learn about flow metrics. They'll never go learn about the correlation in Little's law. That's just not their profession. That's not the thing that they're passionate about. So without that person that's like, I really care about this stuff on the team, and I'll be that, that change agent, that person that does all this research that can bring that back to the team. A lot of teams miss that. And it'd be awesome if everybody had that knowledge and that hunger, but it's just in reality, it doesn't happen all the time, I don't think.
Yep. It's absolutely true. So, but I think hopefully what we've highlighted in this conversation is how well the two things, the Kanban thing and the Scrum thing, how well they work together. And if you're focused on are we doing Scrum or are we doing Kanban, that's probably the wrong conversation, the wrong thing to be focused on. It's more like how can we do both? How can we do both professionally? And that's another wonderful thing that I love about Scrum is bringing this idea of professionalism to I can't even tell you how much I love that, which is one of the reasons why we called Pro Kanban, because we want to embrace this idea of professionalism. But so how do we do both of these things? How do we combine them together and do them professionally? I just think that's where we really, really need to go as a community, I believe.
So would you say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you're doing a Kanban team, and you've always been a Kanban team, maybe you should look at Scrum and say, what can we steal from Scrum? And I would say for Scrum teams out there, if you've never done Kanban, you should be looking at Kanban saying, what can I steal from Kanban and add to my Scrum team? Because it's only going to make you better.
And again, forgive me if I said this before. I know I say this all the time and I sound like a broken record, but you take we're going to use this word mature again, whatever that means. I don't even know what that word means. But if you take a really, really, really mature Scrum team and you take a really, really mature Kanban team, a layperson looking from the outside, I would argue, would not be able to tell the difference between those two teams.
Yeah.
I fundamentally believe that. They just would not be able to tell.
Yep.
That's my 2 cents. A lot of people I think would like to debate me on that, but I really believe it because Scrum people naturally gravitate to flow. Understanding that flow is one of the best ways that you get predictable, within the Scrum framework. And Kanban people realize that there's importance to cadence and things like that. There's a lot of benefit to be had with those types of concepts. And we need it'd probably be helpful if we had somebody who is responsible for or to help facilitate, coaching the team and teaching the team and process excellence and all these things. That role is probably fairly important. There's probably important that we have somebody who's looking after the product. So anyway, I'm preaching to the choir now. I believe. I hope.
Yes. So tell us a little. I'm looking for a little bit more detail on the prokanban.org. So what do you have right now? So right now, I've seen classes out there.
Yep, we just started launching classes just within the past we did our first pilot class at the end of July. More and more classes are coming online. We've got our first cohort of trainers. I'll call them a cohort of trainers. We've got our first cohort of trainers, coming online. So we'll be publishing more and more classes in the coming weeks. There is if you go to prokanban.org, you can see all these things, by the way. There's some learning resources out there. We've already got a list of blogs. We've got a guide that has been published, but a list of blogs in support of those guides if you want to learn kind of more pure Kanban, whatever that means. There's an open assessment to start kind of getting a feel for where your knowledge is right now. I'm hoping in the next month or so, right? This is me making my forecast, right? This is how I make my forecast, by the way. In the next month or so, the real proper assessment will be out there. So we'll have, hopefully we'll have the whole suite of things and just kind of gradually increment from there, in the coming weeks. So it's exciting time. But if anybody's ever built a community from scratch, hopefully you understand it's a lot of work. And of course, everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got an opinion on what it should be and all that. But
we wouldn't know anything about that.
Yeah. You've never been to a scrum.org face to face or anything like that, right? Right. Yeah. So, but it's good. It's a lot of fun, and I'm hoping, and we're already I'm just hoping that this will drive more integration rather than separation, more integration between the two communities. That's another win, I think, if we can get that.
That's awesome. So this has been a great conversation, Daniel. At this time, is there anything you want to plug? I mean, where do you got some new classes coming out for the Pro Kanban? Like, when can people actually take a Pro Kanban class with Daniel Vacanti?
I'm trying to think if I have any on the calendar. I mean, you can certainly reach out to me. I don't know that I really have any on the calendar. I'm really hoping, like I said, I'm hoping this is more of a community thing. I don't necessarily want to see it as a Dan thing, but I'll be around, and I'm sure I'll be giving classes and things like that. But maybe, hopefully, all of us could partner on a class someday or something like that. I think it's that type of thing. I think that would be more interesting to me rather than me just giving a class on my own.
That'd be great.